I've got a heat-proof spatula. Make sure if you're going to be using a spatula for this that it is heat-proof. This is silicone, so if you're looking at me doing this, I'm not actually melting the spatula into the caramel. That would be a bad thing. I am giving it some stir, though, because it's starting to get nice and brown, and it's doing that kind of, it's uneven a bit. I want to make sure I'm not getting it too dark in one spot or another. So if you can see here, the sugar is starting to cook or starting to caramelize, telling me it's almost time for our apples, but make sure you get a nice amount of color first. Otherwise, you're not going to have that dark, intense caramel flavor on this Tarte Tatin. So once we have a nice color in here, I'm going to turn the heat off and I'm going to start arranging our apples. You need to keep in mind here that we're going to invert this. So whatever goes down is going to be what you see on the top of the tart. I like to put my rounded portion of the apple down so we can see that on the top of the tart when I invert it. If you're using quartered apples, pears, you'll have to think about your arrangement, and it's probably going to be slightly different. Be careful here. If you can see, I'm getting a nice reaction from that little bit of water that's still left on these apples. It's reacting with that hot caramel butter mixture, so watch out for a burn. Just going right around the edge here with my apple halves. Make sure you pack in as many as you possibly can. These will shrink just a bit when they cook. So think about that. I want to give as many apples as I can to this tart. Again, the heat is off. Even though this is still sizzling and it sounds like I'm still over a flame, the heat is off. I don't want it to sit over the flame too long because that'll actually burn that sugar that's so beautifully caramelized right now. So I have a nice amount of apples here. I'm now going to take this into my preheated oven for about 20 minutes. And all you have to do, depending on the fruit you're using, is take a skewer, a little paring knife, and pierce into your fruit to determine if it's ready for the puff pastry. All I'm looking for is a tender crisp. So you don't want it to be totally done, but you want it to be almost cooked, because when I put the pastry on, it's only going to take about 15 or 20 minutes longer. So think about that. It's going to go into my oven and come back out for the pastry. I'm now going to take this into the oven to par bake those apples. So our tatin has been in the oven about 20 minutes. I took a skewer and I pierced into our apples, and they felt just like they were starting to get tender, and that's what you're looking for. It'll take a different amount of time if you're using bigger apples. If you're using a firmer apple, it's going to take a little bit longer. If it's pears, it's probably going to take a little longer. Plums will take less. So just use a skewer, and you can judge that initial amount of time. So what I have here is a sheet of puff pastry. I rolled it out slightly just because I wanted it to be the shape of my skillet, and then about 1/4 of an inch. So all I'm doing here is pushing it down, and I want those edges to make sure they're actually turned down around the apple. So I'm pushing them down inside the pan. This is going to help us later when this pastry is done and we have to invert it. It's actually going to be a little bit of a crust, if you will, to hold our apples in place. This is now going to go back into the oven for about 20 more minutes until this piece of puff pastry is nice and golden brown. That's all you're looking for. Our apples will definitely be done by that point. So our tart has been in the oven an additional 20 minutes, maybe about 25, and all I was looking for was the top to get nice and golden brown, and it's gotten nice and crisp. It looks beautiful. I'm going to give it only about a minute, and then I'm going to invert it. The longer you let it sit in the pan, the less of that really nice caramely, buttery sauce will come out. You don't want that sugar to start to harden in the pan because it's not going to come out and be on top of our dessert. So have a plate ready, something that's going to be about the same size as our tart, and something that's also going to allow me to flip it over, which you'll see in just a moment. This can be dangerous. It's probably the most challenging part of this whole process is inverting this and not burning yourself with the hot caramel. So what I do is I give myself a sheet pan to catch any drip. I put the plate on top of the tart. My hand's going to be out of the way here. Grabbing 2 towels, mitts, whatever you have at home, and you're going to do this as quickly as you possibly can because you don't want the caramel to run out and burn your wrist. So I'm just doing a really quick flip over, and my tart almost was perfectly centered on my plate. Like I said, give yourself something for drip because all that drip would have been all over my counter. So here it is, a gorgeous apple Tarte Tatin, ready for a dollop of whipped cream or some ice cream. I can't wait to dig in. Thanks.